Now, we all have school teachers, coaches, and parents that have touched our lives, but in really searching for a person who was dynamic, it wasn't about money, it was about touching lives in extreme situations, I came across that person. It was in a rural area in Germany called the Hunsrück area. Not Deutsch. Anybody speak German here? Deutsch gesprochen? Ein bisschen Deutsch gesprochen? Nine, okay, nine. Ein Bier, bitte. Yeah, we got that, yeah. Who's traveled to Germany? Has anybody heard of Munich? Heidelberg? Anybody heard of Heidelberg? Anybody heard of Berlin? How many people have heard of the Hunsrück area of Germany? Carl, your hand's not up. Okay. Nobody's heard of the Hunsrück area. It was told to me one time it was kind of like Kansas and Missouri, kind of like the area nobody cares about. Of course, they went down when I said that. It's a small, very rural farming area on the far western part of Europe, or Germany, against kind of the Belgian-France area, called the Hunsrück area. And in the Hunsrück area lived a remarkable man. His name was Paul Schneider. Have you ever heard of him? Ever heard of Paul Schneider? And of course not. And everybody heard of Ed Freeman. Would you like to hear about Paul Schneider? Paul Schneider lived in a small little German town called Dickenschied, small little town of less than 1,000 people in the Hunsrück area of Germany. And in 1936, 37, 38, Germany was pretty much in turmoil. Anybody know what was going on then? A fellow by the name of Hitler was taking charge. And he was going to all these small little rural areas, and he was trying to say, hey, this is the best way to go. Germany's going to be reunited here. We're going to put all our posters up, and we all are one united Germany. And they went in the small little town of Dickenschied, and they went and put all the posters up, and they went to Paul Schneider's place. Because you see, Paul Schneider, Deutsch gesprochen, ein Pfarrer. He was a pastor of a small church in Dickenschied. Insignificant church, a small little church there. And they went to his church and put the Christian symbols, and they took them down, ripped them down, and put the Nazi swastika, the Nazi symbols up. Just like they'd done in every other town. But this was different. Paul Schneider said, I'm not going to allow you to do that in my town. That's not the right thing to do, and I am not going to stand for this. You are not going to be allowed to put that Nazi symbols up over my Christian church. And he openly defied him, and openly in front of him, yanked their symbols down and put his symbols back up. Even though they had armed people, and he was a pastor unarmed, he defied them and put his stuff back up. So this time they took him off to jail. Slapped him around a little bit, you know, Tracy, you know, just like you do your kids, just kind of slap him around a little bit, and then sent him back to Dickenschied. The second time, they came in force, and they had the new symbols they put up, and they took down all the symbols of the town down and put his symbols up, and they went to his church, and they took down his symbols and put the Nazi symbols up, and Paul Schneider, the Reverend Paul Schneider, for the second time, openly defied the Nazis and said, you are not going to do that in my town. I don't care what the other towns have done. That's not the right thing to do, and I'm not going to allow you to do that in my town. And he yanked the Nazi symbols right in front of him, defied him, and threw them away and put his Christian symbols back up. This time, they took him to a little bit harder cell. No pads in this cell. And this time, just much like you do, Tracy, they kicked him, slapped him around, kicked him a little bit, indoctrinated him how Hitler was the best thing going on in Germany. The new Germany was wonderful. He needed to get with the program, and sent him back to his town. Now, the Reverend Schneider was a decorated captain in the German army during World War I. He was a patriot. He wasn't a traitor. But he was branded, of course, at that time, dark time in Germany, as a traitor. And so they sent him back to his town. And the third time they came in force. A lot of people, Heinrich Himmler came in with the SS. They also had Joseph Goebbels came in with the propaganda ministry, and they showed how even the traitor Paul Schneider now understands that this is the right thing for Germany, and he steps aside as we put up our Nazi symbols. But for the third time, right there in all that publicity and right there in all that video filming, for the third time and final time, Paul Schneider openly defied the Nazis, and he ripped the symbols down and put his Christian symbols back up. This time, they took him to Buchenwald concentration camp, where he stayed out the remaining of his days, passing his days, giving hope to people, as nearly 100% of everybody he touched in Buchenwald was killed, to include himself. He was executed by lethal injection. Okay, so what? Where is this all getting to? What's the Jackie Robinson case? Well, the case is this. They took Paul Schneider's body back all the way across Germany to that small little hamlet of 1,000 people for burial. And Nazi order stated that only the deacons of the church, family members, are allowed to witness the funeral for the traitor Paul Schneider. Nobody else will be allowed. They'll be arrested if they show up for this funeral. Again, an insignificant guy, made no money. He probably had to have 2 or 3 meals a day with his parishioners. He certainly wasn't rich. He didn't have the big mansion in Connecticut. He was just a simple pastor of a simple town. And yet, his funeral procession, 4,000 people showed up for that funeral. 4 times the size of that town. They showed up to pay homage to Paul Schneider because Paul Schneider epitomizes what I call that chapter in my book, doing the hard right over the easy wrong. We have forks in roads every single day and every single week and every single month, and our kids have forks in the roads, and the easy path is always the wrong path. Always. The hard path is the correct path. How many people saw Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman? He gave a great syllogy there at the end, and he said, we all know the path to take is the hard path, but when nobody takes that path because it's too darn hard to take. So we take the easy path. Paul Schneider chose the hard path, leaving behind a wife and 6 children, because he stood up for the hard right over the easy wrong. And 4,000 people showed up to pay homage to Paul Schneider. But the story doesn't end there, folks. Now fast forward 60 years. 60 years later, when I heard about the Reverend Schneider, and I went to that small little church in that small little insignificant town to see if the grave was still there. Because in Germany, as I think a lot of you know, that you have a 10-year lifespan, and then someone else goes on top of you, unless you pay a lot of money. So 60 years, it was there, and it was absolutely immaculate with fresh flowers, and I was there in the graveyard. There were 2 gals there, one gnädige Frau, maybe in her 70s, and one younger gal, maybe in her late 20s. Were there putting fresh flowers in the grave. And it was a touching scene. And I went up to those two gals, and ein bisschen sehr schlecht Deutsch gesprochen, and spoke a little German about the Pfarrer Paul Schneider, seine guten Mann, Pfarrer of diesen Kirche. And I talked to him in German, and they both rose up, grinning ear to ear like, how do you know about Paul Schneider? He's been a great example for this community for 60 years. Paul Schneider has shown all our children how to do things the correctly way, and he's the symbol for us all. And as they smiled, ear to ear, grins, and tears streaming down their cheeks. I mean, I literally had goosebumps. And to me, folks, it came full circle. That is what Jackie Robinson was talking about now. The only thing that's important is, it's not about fame, it's not about stardom, it's not about money, it's about how many people you've touched in the course of your lifetime. And there is no finer example than the Reverend Paul Schneider. And you did a little research on him, and there's several books out about Paul Schneider. This book's called Paul Schneider, The Witness of Buchenwald. How he gave hope and motivated people in the most extreme circumstances going to their death in Buchenwald. And how he was such an incredible man all the way to the very end. And now there's become chapters. In fact, I was in Berlin at the same, how many people have seen Valkyrie? I was at that same spot where they filmed Valkyrie. It was the actual spot where they executed von Stauffenberg of the place. And there's a big museum, for Resistance Museum. Paul Schneider's photo's right there. So he's being recognized now as a patriot, not a traitor. But Paul Schneider exemplified doing the hard right over the easy wrong. And as leaders, that is our task, to inspire those around us to do the hard right over the easy wrong. And as leaders, as coaches in Little League and scouting and in your churches, you never know when you're making an impact on people. It doesn't have to be a 16-year-old kid. It can be a 50-year-old kid. But you can have an impact, and you can affect their life in a better way. In a better way.